Oh, David, it's awesome to be back, man. How are
Hey, Happy New Year. I'm good.
you?
How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Happy New Year to you too. So, hello everybody. My name is Matt Radolec. I'm joined by my co-host David Gibson. Fun fact, has more dad jokes than the chatbot for dad jokes does. And we've got a lot to cover today. We've even got a brand new segment today. So we'll go over good news because everybody's always got to hear something good that's happening in cybersecurity. We'll talk about one of our brand new segments, Hey They, because I know everybody's already tired of hearing about it. We'll jump on the danger zone. We'll also cover a brand new vulnerability, never before covered before, found by Varonis Threat Lab. So make sure to stay tuned at the end. And as always, we hope we get the chance to interact with you along the way.
That's right. I hear it loud and clear. There's some
That's
good news.
awesome. Yeah, so we always like to start the show with some good news in cybersecurity because oftentimes everybody has this doom and gloom outlook. They're worried about like, hey, the end is coming from a cyber standpoint, but sometimes the good guys do get ahead. So first and
Indeed,
foremost,
they do.
yeah, this Hai Chi 4 operation was a massive success. Law enforcement from over 34 different countries came together over the course of 6 months to take down more than 3,500 cyber criminals for a myriad of different criminal enterprise activities. They had the phishing scams, the romance scams, the sextortion, the investment fraud, money laundering, illegal gambling, business email compromise, e-commerce fraud, and so much more. One of the more notable crypto scams that I picked out, though, was it's called a rug pull crypto scam, and some hackers
Yeah.
in Korea were arrested for that. This is where they hype a new cryptocurrency just enough to kind of get some people interested in buying it, and then they dump it. They let it go to nothing. So they get other people to buy into that cryptocurrency, and it's purely a fraud scheme to just make a little bit of money and then completely devalue the currency by selling out their entire inventory and assets of it. Thought that was really interesting. In total, David, and I'm sure our audience might be shocked by this too, 200 million in cold hard cash was seized and 100 million in crypto assets were seized. So $300 million from 3,500 cyber criminals. I think that tells you though that cybercrime is still a pretty lucrative business.
It is. And one interesting quote that I read in one of the articles about this was the central commodity of this illicit economy is stolen data. Go figure, right? I mean, this is what makes that huge cash and crypto exchange go,
I
is
mean, yeah,
data.
there used to be that saying, all roads lead to Rome. I feel like that's kind of outdated. It's all breaches lead
Yeah.
to, you know? Um,
Yeah.
but that's not the only good news we have to cover. I think that there was something else, something related to, cause of a breach.
Yeah, is this good news? um, I'm looking at this story. 23andMe, genetic data, and kind of the reason that it looks like thousands of their about 14,000 of their 14 million customers were brute forced. Actually, it's credential stuffing, right? So they reuse passwords, go figure. And multi-factor was not required. But then because they had chosen to share their genetic data, there's an option to share your genetic data with your relatives. The amount of people that were affected by this breach was closer to 7 million, about 6.9 million. And I think really, after this, they required MFA, but obviously not before. And I guess, really the question is, your bank doesn't let you not use MFA anymore. And I think we have a poll question in a minute, but just, is this data like worth protecting, in the same way that your money is? I don't know what you think about that, Matt, but
Yeah, when we
yeah,
think
yeah.
about damage that could be done from health information, I put it right up there with financial information. I mean, you could find out about, relatives you didn't want to know you have, or maybe you were trying to hide. You could find out or expose, family medical history that can often be like very like intimate and people like, they want to keep that private. I think about this and I mean, blaming your users, which is also your customers, I want to add, generally not a recommended business practice. But when we look at it, whose fault is it? I'm curious what people say in the chat as well as answering this poll question. If the user used a password and it got breached somewhere else and they reused it on 23andMe, is it their fault? Curious to see what you guys have to say about that, and also, how harmful you think this breach would be.
The other thing that I find with this is, you're allowing one person to make a bad decision that affects a lot of people. And so that I feel like changes that equation. I mean, if you were allowed to use a terrible password for your money, for your bank account, and you lost your money, the impact of that breach is kind of contained. But it's much bigger. I
Yeah,
think,
I like what John said. John said, I can't even pay an electric bill without MFA. That's to pay something.
Yeah.
That's not even to get data. That's to pay somebody else.
Yeah.
I also liked what was said by Krishna, which is around it could expose like reproductive information, like kind of unneeded reproductive information. Definitely. Now, everybody loves talking about AI. And that's why we put a whole segment together called AI Vey, because who doesn't want us to hear about all the dangers or all the happenings inside of AI? Now, I might have leaked to you guys earlier that there is a dad joke chatbot from OpenAI, but OpenAI has got a whole now custom store for custom chatbots. Now, not that I think that my first instinct is we're going to have hackers exploiting this, though it does sound like it's probably something that's going to happen. My gut says we're probably going to have a lot more customer service robots than we did in the past. But the thing that this kind of makes me think about, though, and I'd like to kind of see what our audience says on this, are you guys using chatbots now? Or is your organization leveraging AI in a productive way already, like one that you'd want to share? Or have you tried to, and there's been a challenge? It's, again, something that you want to share with the rest of the audience, or anything you want to add, David?
Well, just that my large language model of dad jokes is really precious to me, and I take a lot of care to secure that data set. But actually, I did, I was kind of curious what people think on this as well. The big app stores like Apple, the App Store, and Google, the Play Store, they take a lot of pains to make sure that there aren't malicious applications in those stores. And this is, I think, similar. I don't think you can charge money yet, but I think you will be able to soon. I'm not sure, whether this same kind of level of rigor is being anticipated as needed for the OpenAI store. So, this is something where if there's not a lot of scrutiny,
a lot of things, like they and there's been a handful of things that have slipped through over time, but by and large,
yeah,
it's been pretty robust in keeping out things like malware or like fraud scams in the actual apps themselves. That is a danger that people have to be concerned about. Is do you know what the full intention of the chatbot that you're using?
Yeah, I did actually search for dad joke chatbots in, I subscribed to ChatGPT 4, and there are a bunch of them. One of them actually tried to take me to an external place, and I'm just like, oh God, is it happening already? It said, do you want to allow access? And I was like, oh my God, here we go. So I am curious about how this is going to play
By and
out.
large, it seems like most of our audience is treading pretty lightly when it comes to AI and chatbots and leveraging it more heavily. Seems like everybody's like not doing anything officially yet. They're kind of exploring
Yeah.
things, but lots of red flags being thrown around. Speaking of red flags, let's jump on in the danger zone. Let's talk about a couple of attacks that we think everybody should be aware about. One of those is there's a huge, crypto schemes going on where some sort of crypto actor will take over a X or a Twitter account handle from popular regulators or even things like cybersecurity companies to promote NFTs and other types of cryptocurrencies. It's really just to grab a little bit of attention, I think, in the media for a short amount of time so that people then look up that cryptocurrency, see if it's worth investing in, and who knows, it could even be the front for another type of pump and dump scam. And what all these these X and Twitter compromises remind me of is almost a decade ago, I attended a security conference at a Goldman Sachs building in Lower Manhattan. And it was all around like what corporations need to do to secure their social media identities. And one of the things that was really profound for me it hit me, a big bank like a Goldman Sachs, them tweeting something could have drastic impacts on the markets. People like news outlets, the entire world watches what the banks are doing and tries to, make money like the banks do. And so they talked about how they actually broke up their social media account passwords into chunks and gave certain people a chunk so that if you wanted to tweet on behalf of the bank, you needed 5 people to come together and share their one little chunk of the password. And then those passwords were rotated after each tweet. So they took it incredibly seriously. And again, this was almost a decade ago, incredibly seriously the power that came from almost like exactly like launch codes is what somebody said in our they took that responsibility of like tweeting on behalf of the bank incredibly seriously. And I'm just wondering, are people out there, are they at least using MFA for their corporate social media accounts? Are they doing things like making sure that complex passwords are there and it doesn't just sit within a social media intern or something like that?
Yeah, it's crazy with something you just said. I mean, the user, the Michael that just talked about the launch codes. I mean, when a tweet, like, when you need to secure it like you do a nuclear bomb, it's pretty crazy. The amount of damage that these things can do.
Yeah, and talking about damage, I mean, we're seeing some kinetic consequences of cyber attacks. And this was something I put as my big predictor in 2023, and it looks like it's already come true.
Yeah, it seems like one common theme here with these stories is, there's a lot of deception, a lot of ways to try to collect and extract money. And when a ransomware gang goes after a victim, like a healthcare, provider, and the healthcare provider doesn't pay, then the threat actors go after the customers or the patients for that healthcare provider. We've heard stories of them, saying you need to pay us or we'll charge you, and then, the swatting, really making life kind of miserable by sending law enforcement teams after these innocent folks. It's just another step. And I also, of course, it has a side effect. It's potentially a denial of service for services that are pretty needed, right? As well.
Yeah, I mean, like, and just in case anybody's like unfamiliar with that term swatting, right? So the hospital was the victim of a ransomware attack. Inside of that data set from that hospital was information about patients. And so what the threat actors were doing is calling the authorities and saying there's like a hostage situation or an active shooter at one of these patients' houses, causing a SWAT team to show up at their house, probably even break down their door, try to stop this active crime that is purportedly taking place, all to punish the hospital for not paying the ransom or try to persuade the hospital to not pay a ransom. And so like one of our audience members said, this is a new low to target hospitals. It's actually a low below that low. They're targeting patients. These people were not the ones that refused to pay the ransom, right? They had nothing to do with exactly, like targeting a cancer patient that's going to a hospital to get care because they're on a list of files that got exfiltrated. It's truly like heinous is the only word I could come up with.
It sure is. And so much medical information, right? It's so precious
that
we surrender all the time. Yes.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off there, David. I was just thinking about vulnerable members of society. And then it got me thinking about the vulnerabilities that we usually talk about next. And, when we think about healthcare information, I just want to double down it. I feel like I read about healthcare breaches on a nearly weekly basis. And, when we think about like some of the sources, some of these breaches, oftentimes healthcare companies are also the ones that can't patch things like Log4Shell or Heartbleed or all these other kind of like long-standing vulnerabilities everybody knows about that get taken advantage of in attacks and expose patient information. But I think, one of those kind of vulnerabilities that you really wanted to cover covered, David. It has to deal with this Androx Ghost malware and taking credentials. This was one that you and I had a ton of back and forth about.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting. There were some exploits, some vulnerabilities that were exploited, but it was to target .env files. So these are files that containers use, like a Docker container would use during startup. If I'm not, keep me honest here, Matt, but
Yeah,
this
no, it's
is
like usually
it,
sits in the root file of a Docker container, right? It's got like different startup things and variables that need to be called out. It often contains things like a key.
Exactly. And if you think about it, it's like, okay, so the container has to do something, so it's got to connect to other stuff. So you have to give it instructions when it starts up on how to connect to the other stuff. And so a lot of folks put credentials in these env files. I read one string where somebody's like trying to do it with environment variables, and everybody's like, yeah, no, that's not going to help. And I just thought, it's like, because it has to start somewhere. It sounds like some external sources, like you really have to build in some layers here. It's not an easy problem to find, and because these credentials are so critical and they can lead to more access to more critical stores like AWS, right, and Azure, right, and other cloud resources, you gotta protect those keys, right?
I think there's two other things to this that you have to think about too. One, like obviously cyber crimes happen all the time, but the FBI doesn't tell us about every little thing. So this usually, from my experiences, indicates that there's like an active campaign, with active victims or multiple active victims, and they're trying to warn the community. So, if you've got, credentials or containers that you run inside of your cloud, now is a really great time to ask yourself the question, do I have plain text secrets, passwords, or keys sitting inside of containers or sitting inside of blob storage or object storage or publicly accessible in some sort of SaaS application that are going to put my organization at risk because we're not storing those credentials properly? And this isn't, when it comes to like containers like Docker, that's not necessarily an easy fix either to stop using a startup command that includes a key. You may have to think about other ways that you can harden that container or prevent someone from, observing or stealing that key, or even thinking about using like more sophisticated secret and key management, with the least privilege concept in mind, so that even if someone did get that key, it wouldn't be very useful for anything.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important. Is if you don't know where these container files live and where they may be, uh, where they may store credentials, that is potentially a risk vector. And I think you're right about the FBI warning there. That's probably what's going on.
Yeah, and if you think about the sort of let me rephrase that. It takes one key or one secret or one password to have like a bad breach. And I look back to like the Uber breach that everybody remembered, where they got in, they found that username and password on that file server that got them into the H1N1 database, and then like 600,000 Uber drivers and riders had all this information exposed. And that's something that you gotta really like have as a reality check for yourself. Like, do you have one of these master keys sitting in plain text in your environment that someone could take advantage of? And also, I saw one of our audience members, how do we know not to make it a priority? Might have been misinterpreted. What we're trying to say here is that if the FBI is issuing a warning, it absolutely should be a priority for an organization to tackle these things. You definitely want to be aware of it and make yourself aware of, the dangers of having keys being exposed. And if this is something you're totally unfamiliar with, if you're sitting on the show today and you're like, I don't even know where to start. We have that question poll at the end of our shows. We have people from Varonis that could help you kind of teach you about that, and even talk about like ways you can help find and scan for keys. As I saw a couple people in the chat kind of say that not really sure, don't really understand this space a whole lot. Now, one of the other things I thought was really interesting, David, is we've seen a rise in hackback campaigns. Now, let's go back to the swatting that we talked about earlier and use this as an
Yeah.
example, right? So hackers are now offering to hack back the ransomware operators on your behalf to avoid paying for things. So instead of paying the ransom, now the option exists for you. I strongly don't recommend this, by the way. Definitely a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, especially if you're located in the United States. but the hacking as a service or hiring hackers to hack back the ransomware operators to try to recover some of your data or recover some of the Bitcoin. I think I even saw that in one case they were able to recover $200,000 of Bitcoin that the victim itself had sent to the hackers. Anything more on that, David?
Yeah, I mean, well, it just, everybody you could see in the chat reacted to like the swatting with, it makes you angry, right? Just, I mean, these victims are getting swatted like this and really inconvenienced when they're already potentially sick. So this is a ransomware group that actually is harnessing that anger, and there is some speculation that the same group is doing the hacking back that is doing the initial ransomware, right? So clever, but again, despicable. We're going to hack you and then pose as somebody that's going to go seek revenge on that hacker, right? So that's, I think they're just definitely playing on the emotions there.
Oh yeah, just like a hackerception here. Like you're just going to find
Yep.
yourself in this endless loop. Well, you got to have hackers to hack those hackers, but then you're there and they're going to mess with you. So you're going to need hackers to hack those hackers. Next thing you know, you got nothing left and all your crypto is gone. So, Dave, we teased at the beginning that we have a new vulnerability to talk about. And Varonis Threat Labs has been pretty hard at work collaborating with Microsoft on this one. You want to tell people, like, what is this new NTLM leak vulnerability and why should people be concerned about it?
Yeah, I like give it up for Varonis Threat Labs. Basically finding this and then getting the folks, well, Microsoft mostly to patch it. But essentially, we found, or Varonis Threat Labs found, three separate mechanisms where a host will authenticate or try to authenticate to a server on the internet and inadvertently or inadvertently, really, it's by design, share the NTLM version 2 hash with that remote host. And so there are three separate vulnerabilities. One is in Outlook, and that's through calendar sharing. There's a vulnerability there. We can talk about that a little bit. One's in Windows Performance Analyzer, and another's just in good old Windows Explorer. And so we should kind of talk a little bit about how this works. But in all three cases, you've got an NTLM hash going out to the internet, which then you can use that, like you can brute force it offline or do something called an authentication relay, right? If you want to explain how that works too.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about like the Outlook one, right? It's so novel.
Yeah.
I always think, like, man, I'm sure other attackers have figured this out. We were just the first ones to report it to try to get it to be fixed. But when you open someone else's calendar, right, you have to authenticate to that calendar to get the permission to view that object. Now, it's really common for an organization internally to have read calendar privileges across the board. Maybe not for the details, but at least for availability. It's a super common setting, right? Or even just the ability to request it. Even that request alone, you're actually using like a hashed copy of your password of MTLM v2 to be able to do that. So as soon as they click open that cal, or if an attacker is able to coerce someone into doing that, they're actually going to send that hash token directly to their computer. And I think with the Windows Performance Analyzer, it's actually a little bit worse, David, where it really is just actively trying to authenticate over the open internet with NTLM v2.
Yeah, it in all cases that there's this hash that's basically going over the internet, but with WPA, it just uses like a straight up URI handler. It's sort of like like HTTP : but for WPA, and then it basically opens and tries to authenticate to that host. I guess that this is. The good news is it's only developers usually that have the Windows Performance Analyzer installed. So not everybody is going to have that, but developers also typically have high levels of privileges too. So it makes sense to really worry about that a little bit.
There is hope. There are mitigations, S&B signing, which is like a standard feature in Windows 11 2022. You can also block NTLM authentication. I mean,
Yep.
Hopefully this isn't the first time you're hearing about the dangers of NTLM. in general, it's considered a dated authentication protocol, and people are moving off of it because of things like, pass the hash or hash cracking and password dumping, and just like the popularity, how easy it is to get big rainbow tables. You can buy them on eBay, you could spin them up on Amazon for like dollars per day, and be able to crunch through a lot of password hashes. So definitely something to be aware of. And obviously, if it's something you can't mitigate, you have to think about compensating controls like, monitoring or even more aggressive password rotation.
Yeah, I definitely think blocking out going NTLM is that would be kind of like first on my list. Especially if I didn't have all Windows 11, hosts, if people were maybe running some older versions of Windows as well. So that and hopefully this is another nail in the coffin for NTLM in general,
Yeah.
right? But it takes a long time to get rid of
Didn't need
that
another
stuff.
one. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
And we'll take a couple minutes now, see if any questions came in during the chat today. It was really nice to interact with everybody.
We did get one question about
Yeah.
NTLM, right?
Let's take a look.
Yeah, curious how to check to see whether it's in use or not.
Yeah,
Right?
best easiest way, Jeremiah, if you don't have your AD events shipping somewhere like a Varonis, go in and log on to a domain controller, or have an admin of one of your domain controllers log on, pull up the security log. Inside of the security log, you're going to look for those NTLM authentication events. And even if interestingly enough, if somebody from the production team wants to Google Varonis NTLM, we could even drop a blog post into how to investigate NTLM authentications into the chat. One of the members of the Varonis IR team put together a how to investigate NTLM. It's in the context of a brute force attack, but in your case, you're just trying to look up for NTLM authentications. I'd also hate to say it's probably a guarantee you're using NTLM in some capacity. Most organizations cannot eliminate its use completely. So it's more a question of like compensating controls and how do we keep it from being abused. One of the easier ways to keep it from being abused is obviously long and complex passwords and rotating them frequently, such as the goal of a lot of privileged identity projects, but also privileged identity monitoring. Being able to see when those admin accounts or service accounts are getting abused is another good compensating control.
Some viewers are interested in where they can find more discoveries from Varonis Threat Labs.
I'll throw that one at the production team too, to see if they can throw the Varonis Threat Labs blog or a link to the blog in the chat as well.
Excellent. Yeah, the Varonis blog I think is a good source of that. So I think there's a filter there you can use as well.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much wraps it up. So we'll drop a few other links in the chat. And again, we appreciate y'all being here, and we look forward to our next episode of State of Cybercrime.
Thanks so much.